St. Louis's post-war project of downtown renewal was one of the most ambitious in the nation. Some plans never materialized. Others were breathtaking in conception and execution. Just to the north and west of downtown, construction began on a newly cleared 57-acre site in 1952. The Wendell Pruitt and William Igoe homes became a proud symbol of St. Louis's rebirth. A modern break with the crumbling past that surrounded it.
My family came from a very small house, and I would say it was like a shack, actually. There were 3 rooms, and there were 12 in my family. The sleeping conditions were quite crowded. My mom slept in the kitchen, if you can believe that. She had a roll-away bed in the kitchen next to the pot-belly stove.
Some friends came by and said, "You got a new project up here. We're going to put an application. You want to come?" Right on the corner there of Jefferson and O'Fallon, it was the first building they opened up in Pruitt. It was like an oasis in the desert. All this newness. I'd be the first person to occupy my unit. That was a thrill for me. And then they put me on the 11th floor, where I was. We didn't live in the second floor. And they were putting me on the 11th floor with elevators. But once I moved in on the 11th floor with elevators, I called it poor man's penthouse. I didn't want to live on another floor. I never thought I would live in that kind of a surrounding.
When we first moved in, it was probably one of the most exciting things of my life. It was like another world. Everybody had a bed. My mom had her own bed, and I was so happy to see her just in a room to herself with a door.
We moved there really close to Christmas. It was like a Christmas present. There was snow on the ground. There was lights all over the place, cars back and forth, people walking back and forth. And everybody had Christmas lights. Everybody had Christmas lights. So it seemed like they all came on about the same time. Just as soon as the sun would go down, the Christmas lights would start to come on. And it was, wow, look at this. I could still see it. It was really nice.
I tell you, when I drive down on Jefferson, I always have to park and just look. It brings back wonderful memories. I'm very truthful when I say my memories of Pruitt-Igoe are probably some of the best memories I have.
I remember a warm sense of family and a warm sense of community. Pruitt-Igoe was a place that I remembered as this wonderful building of different smells of pies and cookies and cakes and all these eclectic dishes that were being cooked by the residents on the 11th floors. It was a place where we played hard, ran up and down these little breezeways and up and down the steps and running around. And so it was a place where kids could really get a chance to play hard.
Pruitt-Igoe was a safe place for me. I mean, I don't care what people said about it that lived outside there. If you didn't live in there, you thought it was a bad place. But growing up in there was, you knew the people, and you were never alone. I have to say you were never alone, because there's somebody across the hall, somebody down under you, somebody up over you. There's people here, there's lights here, there's life here. And so I'm not alone, and I'm not afraid.
I like people, I like neighborhoods I like driving. I like hear music. I like to see people on their front porches. I see kids playing in parks. I like to see schools. I like to see libraries. I like to see, and at one time, Pruitt-Igoe had that. It had this life, this engaging electric life.
There were friendships and bonds formed there that have just lasted a lifetime. I know a lot of bad things came out of Pruitt-Igoe. I know they did. But I don't think they outweigh the good. I really, really don't. Because at first, Pruitt-Igoe was just a wonderful place. It was wonderful. I think Pruitt-Igoe would be here today had it been maintained like it was when they first opened it up.
When we first moved into Pruitt-Igoe, it was clean. Always clean. The maintenance men were always sweeping. The elevator was always clean. And I remember there was a quilted kind of a cloth that went on the elevator when you moved in so you wouldn't scratch it up. But the maintenance started to just go down and down and down and down until it seemed like that nobody cared anymore about Pruitt-Igoe. The maintenance men stopped cleaning the elevators. The kids got to where they would go in the elevators, the personal restroom.
I mean, many times these urine-smelled elevators, they stop. And you push the button all day long and nobody would come. So you'd be in this dark elevator. I remember me and my brother oftentimes stuck on this stupid urine-smelled elevator and couldn't get out. So what we learned to do was to push the doors open, find a little cable, and pull ourselves up to our floor and pull ourselves out of there. In fact, we became the guys who people would call who needs to get somebody out of the elevator. We'd come, we'd push the doors open. You're down on that floor. We'd go down there and we'd help get them out of there.
You've been under considerable fire because of what is alleged to be, let's say, poor housekeeping practices on the part of the housing authority. How do you respond to that? What do you think is really the thing that's wrong here?
Well, in dealing with public housing, the problem that we find the most pressing is one I've talked about for quite a while publicly. The fact that we simply do not have enough money to operate as well as we should, perhaps.
What about this incinerator here behind us? Do you have difficulty with things like that?
Well, this is a building which will be cleaned. Every building cannot be cleaned at exactly the same moment. People working all day cleaning inside and outside. The incinerator is rather small, but it was built that way, and there's not much we can do about it. We do the best we can, and in most cases it works quite well.
We pulled up with the moving van. The stench from the garbage piling up in front of the incinerator wafted out of the elevator, and I knew at that point that there was something drastically different about this living arrangement. The sight of all these huge buildings and all of these people, just the overall non-upkeep of the place. It was a shock for me as a kid, and I never really recovered from that first day.
Almost from day one, these buildings were under-maintained. There was never an adequate provision for the maintenance that was so important to these very complex structures. Government paid for building them, but the maintenance had to come out of money from the rents of the tenants. And the tenants couldn't afford the very highly skilled maintenance people to keep these buildings operating. So in this very basic way, I think the public sector failed the people who were living in these buildings.
From the first, public housing had enemies. Banks, realtors, and chambers of commerce lined up against it, fearing its effect on their bottom line. Public housing was labeled as un-American, as a communist erosion of the free market. But clearing slums and constructing large buildings was popular with downtown business interests and building trades. Clearance allowed for profitable redevelopment. Construction meant lucrative building contracts and jobs. And so the law was written and the slums were cleared. The towers built and valuable land redeveloped, all with federal funding. But the enemies of public housing had their say as well. No federal funds for operation and maintenance. The projects became dependent on their tenants' income. In the beginning, low and middle income applicants flooded into Pruitt-Igoe's new apartments. Rental incomes were strong. Grounds were maintained, elevators worked, security staff patrolled the area. It thrived in the crowded city. But the city was changing.
One of the big questions for planners and policymakers and politicians during and after World War II was what would the future of St. Louis look like in terms of its population? Between 1930 and 1940, St. Louis actually declined slightly, and that put the fear of God in the city planners and the politicians. So growth becomes almost a kind of psychology. They really wanted to believe that that was an anomaly, that that was a Depression-era problem, and the growth trajectory was actually going to be upward after World War II, so that there would be about 1 million people by 1970. And if you were going to fit 1 million people into the city, then you had to have some kind of large-scale housing. The problem is, though, that there are two trends going on at once. One of the trends is upward growth, and the other trend is large numbers of people who have enough means leaving the city. And planners mistook which one was the dominant trend.